Yeah. So, welcome to the AI Agent Montreal meetup. Today, you have the amazing opportunity to have Duncan Brown. A little reminder about the meetup. It's a meetup for people curious about AI, and we want to demystify AI and tool and tech trends around it, but also spread and share best practices around it. So today, Duncan will talk about team dynamics after AI. Just for the organization, the talk is recorded and we will share it on our YouTube channel. Feel free to see it again. Feel free to ask any question in the chat and we'll try to answer it along the presentation at the end, depending on you, Duncan. And that's it. Thank you so much, Duncan, and the place is yours.
You're most welcome. Thank you very much for having me here. It's very exciting to be virtually, at least in Montreal, a place I've always wanted to visit. I'd like also just to thank Jacqueline who introduced us,
Yeah.
which is why I'm here. So as we go, please feel free to put questions and observations in the chat, and we'll come to those at the end.
At the end.
Right. Okay. I'd like to start with a quote from Ian Mackay, who is a musician and he's also a skateboarder. He says, skateboarding is a way of learning how to redefine the world around you. For most people, when they saw a swimming pool, they thought, let's take a swim. But I thought, let's ride it. When they saw the curb or a street, they would think about driving on it. I would think about the texture. My name is Duncan Brown. I am, since August last year, I've been CTO for Digital Prevention Services Portfolio, which is a group of roughly 600 people inside NHS England. That's the National Health Service, the sort of state healthcare service in England. And it's one of the largest organizations in the world and accordingly difficult to get to know, which is highly relevant for what I'm going to tell you. But I'm not representing NHS England. I'm just me here. Before I joined NHS England, I spent just over a year and a half as head of software engineering at the British government's incubator for AI on the right there, which was attached directly to number 10 Downing Street, where the Prime Minister's office is, and then to the government digital service, which is where a lot of the technology in government happens. At i.ai, we sought to build sort of AI-powered services from the centre of government and to partner with other government departments to help with their problems. And before that, I worked on some other public sector stuff in England. So I gave this talk late last year, and I actually pitched it even earlier in the year. And obviously in AI, everything changes really, really quickly. But I'm going to try and give you something of lasting value by talking about people, not about machines. So loads of the discourse around AI assumes an inevitability to adoption, which sees the quality of the models as the only barrier to adoption. And that's true of like weird hype dreams like the AI 2027 document that projects superintelligence in the next couple of years. And it's also true when the Tony Blair Institute in this country says there are going to be £35 billion worth of AI savings to realize in the public sector. Downstream of inevitability, we have the discourse of feasibility, of how we get it all to work, which tends to treat inevitability as given. I don't usually like to share this sort of like McKinsey content, but it's kind of indicative. And finally, we're going to talk about where we are today, which is desirability. So I'm coming at this from the point of view of having run services for thousands, tens of thousands, and now millions of users. And it seems to me that what we choose to have reflected, magnified, and transformed by this magic mirror that is AI reflects in turn on us. I'm going to argue that irrespective of the merits of our choices, which are often real merits, the use of AI always promotes the legible and the quantifiable at the cost of the illegible. But as teams and systems scale, the illegible, usually the social and the small p political, tends to dominate the work. And there is a cost to this, but there are also benefits if you look for them. There are things we can now learn about teams and about work itself, thanks to the existence of AI and the questions it invites. During my time at the incubator, we ran a lot of small teams. Some of them were very small, like 1 or 2 people, usually AI engineers. And there was this blog post that was widely shared and often referred to, especially amongst those smaller teams, but it had a lot of currency and management level too. It was called The Era of the Small Giant. The writer, who's naturally the founder of an AI startup, writes about reimagining what exceptional people can accomplish when unburdened by the friction of organizational mass. Here on the right there, the moments of true breakthrough that he goes on to say, groups of fewer than 7 people, individuals who are exceptional at their craft and deeply aligned on vision. Now imagine taking that small, high-functioning team and amplifying each person's capabilities tenfold through AI tools. This isn't hypothetical, it's happening right now. I call this emerging reality the era of the small giant, small in headcount, but giant in impact. Amplification is a dial that until recently we didn't even know we could turn. And this is really emotive and assertive language, like true breakthrough, genuine innovation. And he follows up with this extraordinary further claim, which is that amplification through AI must be a good thing, not necessarily so much for the individual. And I think we've all played with Claude Code and things like that, but for the team itself. This is a serious claim requiring serious proof, which isn't included in the blog post. But the idea has great power. And I think one reason for that is there is a kernel of truth in there. Like him, I've found that small teams, as long as they're competent, seem to be better at getting things done. Synchronization is a lot easier. No one has to be someone else's like stakeholder, and you can have kind of a good time too. And this is what I mean when I talk about the uses to which we put AI, reflecting what we ourselves care about. We do truly wish in our hearts and social souls for a small team. So the golden hammer has found a nail. You can keep a small team, but instead of doing the expected thing of breaking up the domain a bit and the team a bit together when things get too big, you just give people bigger levers. And I think the question this person wants us to ask is, where do I get these levers? But the question I want to ask is, what does this mean for the team where it happens? In AI discourse, there's a standard counter-argument to posts like that. And it goes something like, just because AI can make artifacts, if you understand much of the work of the team to be making artifacts, then making 10 times more artifacts is, of course, that's going to be good. But artifacts, whilst they are the critical product of teams, are not really what the work is about. And that's a silly mistake to make. There's a worldview here about what software development actually is. And this seems to be the latest jag in a transition that's been going on for at least as long as I've been in the industry. And as you can see, I'm quite old relative to many people in it now. It's about the social standing of software developers. I think it's really easy to forget, or if you're younger, why would you know, just how antisocial the work of programming, as we called it back then, was perceived to be around the turn of this century. The popular perception of the job was that it was 100% artifact production, effectively, by nerdy loners. In recent years, it's become much more socially acceptable to be a software developer. The profession has become more inclusive, and the work is more accurately acknowledged in serious organizations to be fundamentally socio-technical, not just technical. So it feels uncanny to me to have that perspective. It's all about the things spoken for again. Except this time around, you get quite senior people who should really know better, literally asking questions like, why aren't teams shipping products 100 times faster? Like, why can't we have more things, dude? This seems to me to be a strange question to ask. It reflects a fantasy, I think, that is about other people and not about us. The fantasy that however many things we produce, there will be ready consumers. But we here in this meetup, we're here thinking about this stuff, and I think we are more serious than that. And most of us who have spent time making things are really used to the rate of artifact production being kind of low on the list of our worries compared to questions like whether they are the right artifacts. It's kind of a niche thing. And yet, at the same time, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to create a prototype of that in 10 minutes? Wouldn't it be nice just to have to not write that module? Wouldn't it be fun? And wouldn't it, above all, be pragmatic? But here we are now in the emerging reality from that post. And it turns out, and I have observed this, that when you create a lot of prototypes in 10 minutes, or maybe you create one prototype that's really, really complicated and high fidelity, that what you do is create masses of work for everybody else. If your team's cognitive capacity is a teacup, you are emptying the teapot into it. Your colleagues have to look at it, your researchers have to talk to people, you have to work out how to publish it and share it, your boss is going to see it and insist that you immediately roll it out. Prototypes can indeed be cheap. You can just draw a picture. I led a project in the incubator which took full advantage of AI's production tools, only to run heavily and terminally aground on organizational governance and confused expectations in the department with which we were engaging. In that situation, there was literally no quantity of artifacts that would have helped. Whilst this failure is a little bit disappointing, it's interesting to observe that it doesn't work. This is a signal. We can now say we live in a world, an emerging reality, where we can have kind of anything at any time to a basic level of competence. And all of the real problems, the people problems, as we used to call them, still exist. And this is finally proof positive, hard evidence that artifacts are not really what we're here for. We are optimizing about a mile from the bottleneck. AI may be giving you a million prototypes, but if you listen, AI is telling you in quite a painful way that being able to get feedback on your artifacts is much, much more important than the artifacts themselves. And now it's easier than it's ever been to make that argument. Good. So amplification is seductive. The other means of augmentation that AI theoretically offers is hybridization, two skill sets in one head. And I think this is really interesting. In a mature team I ran a few years ago at the Department for Education, we inaugurated regular public design dev catch-ups to be explicit synchronization points between disciplines because ad hoc communication was too sporadic and tended to take place in private conversations. This worked really well. The challenge from AI to do that differently sounds a bit crazy when you say it out loud, but I think in kind of an interesting way. Instead of having to set these explicit synchronization points, what if we arranged it so that people who depend on each other, say me, the technical lead, and my colleague Adam, the lead designer, what if they were the same person? There's no faster feedback loop, certainly, than the one inside your own head. We do want shorter feedback loops and lower synchronization overheads. So here again is the golden hammer. Right now, the price we pay for multiple skill sets is that we have to have multiple people, and then we have to keep everyone aligned, and so on and so forth. AI proposes, let's tool them up with skills as and when required. Again, we never thought of this because obviously you can't do that. You can't put two brains in the same head. Now, kind of maybe we can, and now we can see what it looks like when we do. To try and think about that, I want to get a bit more kind of concrete and talk about UI design specifically, because the commodification of design through AI is something that was absolutely rife at the incubator and indeed in my current job, and it seems everywhere in the world at large. I saw more than one team ship really functional and often quite widely adopted within niches products without a single glance from anyone with designer in their job title. And I took part in multiple senior conversations where we would weigh up recruiting designers directly against recruiting engineers with exactly this kind of issue in mind. I'm just going to tell you, as a bit of a sidebar, what I mean by design here. So for those of you who haven't worked in the British public sector, I imagine that's most of you here today, the role of designers in the classic government digital service style multidisciplinary team is quite particular. So these guys work overwhelmingly with existing components that are enshrined in the GovUK design system, that's that on the right, and made available through common tooling. That means their job is not to invent visual aesthetics. It's all about how it works, not how it looks. Many of these people write code and they contribute to the design system. It's all open source, and that's why the design system works so well. Okay, so I'm going to set out the argument for rolling up the designer into the head of the engineer. I think it goes a bit like this. In this world where we have a really mature design system, it's easy for AI to do a good enough job because the vocabulary exists. Everything's got a name in the design system. Two designers talking about radio buttons, you know what they're talking about, and so do they, and so can the AI. And if this is true, the AI can think in the same terms as the designer and has a finite set of components to choose from. The designer moves from being a necessity on your team to being a luxury. So here's a quick picture of that. So over here on the left, there's me and Adam, he's the lead designer. And here in the middle, that sort of like loop thing, that's the conversation we're having. And the product comes out of the conversation, that co-design. And obviously lots of people having these conversations. And over here on the right is the emerging reality. So over here, an AI engineer interacts with a tool in a really fast feedback loop, fast, desirable feedback loop, and the product flows directly out of their fingertips. You can see there are some trade-offs here, obviously, about the different kind of communication channels, but I think there's one in particular that amounts to a flaw, and it's this. The connection to the design system and the tooling ecosystem that make it possible for the tool to do this in the first place. You can see now that Adam's on the left is a read-write relationship, and over here is a read-only relationship. That's fine if one or two people do it, but in the inevitable tragedy of the commons, this is on the way to being out of date and redundant, the design system, because all of the juice that comes from the world, all the engagement with real problems is getting diluted. There's less feedback in the overall system. And as you can imagine, this design system gets weaker, and then this tool gets weaker, and then this product gets weaker. Even though this person, the AI engineer over here, continued doing an absolutely bang-up job throughout. And the nature of that weakness is that all of this stuff is becoming generic. We're taking intention out of the system, and we're taking information and feedback out of the system. Whereas once a new kind of problem would result in feedback, now it results in a kind of a kludge because it's harder for the design system to sense changes in the world and to adapt to them, even as it's used in more and more diverse contexts and might actually be expected to receive more feedback. It will go stale faster. I believe I saw this happen. I had expected part of the work of the incubator to be to contribute back design system patterns around some of the novel things we were doing with the tech, especially around interfaces for human supervision and oversight, some of which were quite novel and interesting. But it took a really long time and quite a lot of conversations to even hire a lead designer. And I don't think that was necessarily really a prejudiced decision. From the org's perspective, it made total sense. Like, why would you bother to spend money on something when you can keep on shipping regardless? And there's one more cost to identify here, perhaps a cousin of this one here with the feedback loop, which is that in a project which fails, or even in fact in one which succeeds, the amount of learning and therefore of feedback, not to a design system, but to an organization, is multiplied by the number of heads involved and amplified according to the variety of roles and positions within the system of the org. Both Adam and I over here, not to mention the rest of our team, we've gone out into the world with our experiences and our learning. But in the incubator project that failed because it was rejected by the organization, all we could do, the three of us in that tiny little team who tried, was like play back for 45 minutes on a Thursday afternoon. And that felt inadequate. So I want to put the argument against hybridization in three ways. First and foremost, I want to make an argument from diversity. The skills and experience, including life experience, that each of us has directly shape our understanding of the problems we're trying to solve. Like Ian Mackay, people look at a swimming pool and they think, let's ride it. It's wrong, but it's not kind of actually wrong. With those multiple perspectives, we solve problems better and more thoroughly because we can develop and challenge each other's intentions. That process and that development process is much more alive there. And that requires individuals, it requires niches, and it requires exposure to problems over time. So I see the invitation to flatten our niches. And my response is, thank you for reminding us of how important niches are. Let's dig them even deeper and champion and celebrate teams and hire people that are as diverse as possible. Secondly, I want to argue that it undermines in turn the skill of translation, that is the grease in the machine of multidisciplinary teams. In translating between our disciplines, we spar with each other and we put that into practice when we engage with the wider organization. I was at a panel recently where someone argued that translation was the critical skill for successful digital transformation. It's kind of a slightly silly question, but it's a good answer because organizational transformation is this continual negotiation between worldviews that don't necessarily understand each other. The echo chamber of your own head will not equip you for this, the actual work. And finally, and I think this is really clear cut, the lifeblood of the tools is their continual freshness, which comes from change in the agreed patterns. Change is driven intentionally by groups and individuals learning from direct practice and forming the identities and communities that create new things. If you increase the size of the audience and simultaneously reduce the numbers of real practitioners, i.e. those people who drive that change in the ecosystem, you will first see diminishing returns, and then you will kill the ecosystem, and then you will kill the tool. And you will know this has happened when everything looks kind of the same and nothing quite works right. And I think we can see signs of that too. The design system is only one example of a product depending on an ecosystem that the tools don't have to respect. Another good example would be the incubator's Abtract project. That project was coded mostly with AI. And to be clear, I think it's a brilliant project that achieves really good things. Effectively, it structures data for planning processes, but it just couldn't exist without the highly evolved planning data ecosystem that has been intentionally built up over years by teams in the planning departments here in England. You could also point to open source software, documentation, standards, and so on. Anything that's held in common is now subject to this new kind of attrition. A bit of a parable of this is what happened to Tailwind CSS, which is a popular open source library that a couple of weeks ago now just had to fire half their development team because nobody went to their developer docs anymore and saw their upselling ads. Everything was scraped and mediated by AI, massive explosion in audience, and at the same time, losing that feedback loop that the audience would usually bring you. Paradoxically, this once desirable explosion in consumer numbers is negative for these until recently thriving ecosystems. This is because the skills, and in the case of Tailwind CSS, the marketplaces that shaped it and made it viable, are devalued because they are not legible to AI's solipsistic worldview. So much for having skills. What about acquiring them? In this world too, AI optimizes for the individual. You can go on LinkedIn today and find articles about seniors getting all the benefit while juniors lose their learning opportunities and so on. And you see kind of like wild discourse, like grads going directly to become architects because supposedly that's all that's going to be left. For junior developers, we panic because the golden hammer wangs down on autopilot, not copilot. But we should ask why these people are here in the first place. Is it actually so they can move low-risk tickets across the Jira board? In which case, great, let's immediately fire them and replace them with Claude Code. Or is it something different, of which shipping code happens to have become a core supporting component? I want to make the argument that we're missing something more urgent here too. Work is an ecosystem as well. We're all in a continuous feedback process of assessing our options for our next action, our next career move, our next identity. Some of those juniors will be tech leaders and go into management. Some will be happy as ICs forever. Still others will move sideways into other disciplines or even other fields. The feedback they get from their work and their learning helps them make these decisions. And these are the decisions which shape their work and their teams and their organizations and their field, right up to the fact that we're here together on this call having this conversation. The sort of decisions that end up with us being here and books being physically published and institutions existing and not existing and so on. Just as an infinite supply of instant code shows us where the bottleneck isn't, when we can aggressively optimize for the speed at which low-risk tickets move across the Jira board with a junior developer's name on them, it seems obvious that this take on what it means to be junior fundamentally ignores the collective work in which these people participate. It seems obvious that a load-bearing part of teams right now that we haven't ever questioned or ever had to question is this now old-fashioned form of direct practice, which brings junior developers into contact with the work, with the tools, and with the domain. To go back to skateboarding, they start off seeing the curb, but they come to feel the texture. AI coding tools are bringing major changes in the way software is made. There will be new standards to learn and new techniques and indeed new textures. But, and I know this is a slightly unfashionable point of view, but I believe that just as there is gravity on Earth, there is vast and irreducible complexity out there in the world, a complexity that results, and I feel I really have experienced this viscerally, that results in very sludgy and unsatisfactory work if it's not approached with intention. So these people may not need to learn to code in the same way, and the code may not give them the path it gave me and maybe some of you to where we are today. And maybe some of us can substitute code, a different word for code in that sentence. But these people still need to learn to shape. We've been lucky that those two things, coding and shaping, have coincided. Because without an incentive to learn, these niches are harder to dig and diversity is harder to achieve. And that's what makes mediocrity. When a system that's grown organically is forced to account for itself in the face of a new, more productive system, it's difficult to make a fair comparison, to weigh the benefits of, say, more communication, more failure, and more autonomy against the much more legible benefits of more features shipped. In his book, Seeing Like a State, James C. Scott writes about the ways in which bureaucracies impose mechanistic systems on people and on nature for the purpose of making the world they govern legible and exploitable. The forest is not an ecology, it is so many tons of firewood. And the will to exploit the forest enters into a mutually reinforcing cycle with abstraction. Abstractions, like firewood for a forest, enable exploitation. Exploitation empowers grander abstractions, gridded city layouts replacing medieval streets. And the things that cannot be measured, ecology, are collateral damage. What Scott describes at the level of monarchs and nations also occurs in the mundane environment of work. Ivory tower software architecture is a pure expression of this. To extend the forest metaphor, you could call the incredibly, almost infinitely complicated experience of being close to a problem ecology, and call the things in your boxes and arrows firewood. The ivory tower looms because exercises in generalizing always flirt dangerously with cliché, especially when the generalizer lacks context. And yet AI whispers a promise here too, its most seductive promise, the promise that ought to heal all its other defects, abstractions on tap, just-in-time legibility. The mediums we use to communicate with each other shape the way we work. Personally, I love cheap to create public Slack channels. There's an intentionality to those which is hard to mistake, and there's a really low cost of failure if the initiative turns out not to have been viable. These mediums are part and parcel of the messages we send. What happens when we try to fill out the content of communications by pulling them out of context and condensing them? My job right now is working for like a really big organization inside another really big organization. And the outer organization especially, and in fact, sometimes the inner organization, they're so large and so complicated that I've come to realize, as everyone must eventually, that it's going to be impossible for me to understand it all. I just kind of resigned myself to that. One of the things I've noticed, though, about this organization and other large organizations is that we can't stop, even under those circumstances, giving things names. When things are too big or complicated for the names we give them, we just continue to refer to them, but we let the language lose a lot of meaning. In this way, things that are hard to name resist compression. You keep like pulling out the same file from the filing cabinet, but it always has something different in it. Like the compressing and labeling process that usually takes place when we name something hasn't worked. Everything in my world, like prevention services, this is all vaccinations and screening and so on, has dozens of faces and dozens of names, and those names themselves are shared by dozens of further faces of further things, and it's deliciously, hilariously inadequate. In practice, what this means is that it's actually quite difficult for me to read a given situation and make it legible for my purposes and understand what I need to attend to and what matters to me and what risks it presents. In this environment, even my purposes themselves are hard to read. Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Could I be doing something different and more useful in this huge, like, dynamic system that I can sort of at best dance with in the systems thinking literature, as it puts it, but I can't possibly master it. For me and for everyone I work with, this information environment manifests in these like torrents, like through our inboxes, through meetings, through Slack and Teams, through pull requests and tickets and memos and commissions and conversations. For me, it resembles nothing so much as the attention economy we all know and hate from outside work, where content jostles for our eyeballs. The drivers when I open my phone are dopamine and social validation, but at work, my attention tends to be directed by anxiety, time pressure, and purpose if I can get it. And there's one more difference, which is that at work, there are potentially quite serious consequences for missing a beat. So just as the social algorithms are feeding me content that's kind of in the neighborhood of content I seem to like, at work, I'm operating my own algorithm. I'm choosing what to permit myself to become interested in. This is how I spend my one wild and precious life. And when I choose to attend, I'm dipping my cup into a stream that is very fast flowing and very deep. When AI offers us the means to deal with too much information, the proposition must be that it will automate that internal algorithm that decides what we attend to. Like a mother bird partially digests a worm before regurgitating it into her baby's mouths, AI can hunt down the valuable information, partially digest it, and regurgitate it into me. These summaries are automated sense-making, relentlessly compressing the uncompressible. Somehow people are surprised that getting the AI to be accurate is difficult. But this isn't a technology problem, it's a philosophy problem. You are trying to satisfy billion-dimensional, ever-changing, utterly subjective, embodied truth. And this thing will also supposedly give us all the unbiased view from nowhere. And we will achieve this, supposedly, through stuff like guardrails. But that just doesn't make sense. I hate having so many meetings. I can't bear the idea that we're sliding inexorably into sort of into entropy by way of too many meetings. And I've seen a lot of evidence in the public sector that we are, and it seems to be getting worse. And frankly, I worry that the end of all this for our societies will not be pretty. But be that as it may, the solution is surely not to reduce the perceived cognitive cost of meetings by making sense of them by an automatic process. When you say it out loud, it seems mad. Like, if anything, we should be making meetings more painful, not less painful. But let's take the opportunity to ask the useful question. Like, even if we could automate this stuff up to the nines and have meetings all day long and never be in danger of losing a salient point, would we want to? And for me, the answer, having peered over the edge of that abyss, is a resounding no. No way. I don't want to live in the faster and faster swirling work attention economy being chaperoned by systems that cannot be surprising. More information, more summaries, more information, more summaries, and more at every crank of the handle. It's a singularity, yes, but a singularity of busy work. It's based on a fundamental misreading of what matters where we work together, and both forgivably and unforgivably, it's lazy, not malignant. But we can use this. We can use it as evidence to help us build a better world. The first step is to know that the busy work singularity exists and is waiting for us. And the next step is to take up the challenge and ask, seriously, if we do think we need to deal with the problem of too much information, and we can see that compression is ultimately a bust, and that is important news, and we're now knee-deep in the evidence, what should we do? What, in fact, is the information environment we seek for ourselves and for our teams? I believe that rather than increase our efforts to manage large amounts of information by adding smaller, fuzzier versions of the same information on top of it, we should focus instead on shrinking flows of information at the source by stopping things. Fred Brooks memorably wrote in The Mythical Man Month that he regretted setting a team of 150 people to work on something because he didn't want to see them sit idle. That would have been hard to resist. He should have tried stopping 150 people from doing something they are already doing, which they see as valuable, and from which the organization has been convinced it will derive benefit. I've not yet had the privilege of working in an organization which is good at killing projects. I would be very curious to hear about such a place if it exists. I imagine it would be a pleasure to work there. Whether AI is compressing or expanding context, it clutters the team's information environment. When it summarizes, it misses. When it expands, it invents. The meaning of things that are in the process of naming perhaps that are in the process of being pulled apart for naming, must be continually negotiated between us as people. There is literally no other way to make sense of things. Okay, we're coming close to the end now, so I'm going to do a quick recap, and then we can have questions and stuff if you like. Okay, I hope I've put across my view on skills. These are the senses through which we perceive the work and the problem we're working on, and our practice of those skills directly shapes our perspective. The deepening of this perspective amounts in time to expertise, and expertise creates difference. Difference increases the quality of the work. This all means that I value a strong coupling between skills and individuals, and I don't see the kind of superhuman AI engineer who can wear every hat, having very much purchased beyond the earliest prototyping stage of a project. I think there's a very clear argument for having them earlier on. I certainly wouldn't want to live in a world where that's all there is, but we don't have it. I think it's a good idea to walk fast in the opposite direction, diversifying teams and deepening niches. For those early in their careers, the automatic task completion machine is, at this point in time, malignant. It divorces them not only from skills, but from the problem domain altogether, because by stripping their skills, it strips their senses. On context, like everyone, I am tantalized by the idea that the jungle of information that shapes my daily life at work could be condensed into a tidy slate. I reject this idea because I believe the work of sense-making belongs to me and to us. The problem is not insufficiently condensed information, because the information is not condensable. The problem is an information environment that requires much more aggressive management and feedback. I often think about Alistair Coburn's observation that software teams are a production line not of code, but of decisions. And AI tools that do the work simply don't do that bit of the work. They do all the rest, and they stress out, and indeed sometimes they burst the bottleneck. Ian McGilchrist, a British neuroscientist, wrote a book called The Master and His Emissary about how the two halves of our brains perceive the world. Part of this book sets out his theory that the way the left-hand side of the brain works, this is the side of the brain that's really narrowly focused, the part that constructs the sort of interlocking abstractions that form abstract thought, has taken a completely dominant role in shaping the world around us, which in turn reinforces its internal dominance in a spiral. As with James Scott's bureaucracies, the systems we choose to construct tend to optimize for exploitation and conceptual cleanliness to the detriment of underlying ecologies. McGilchrist's left brain gives us, and I quote, a conceptual version, abstracted from the body, no longer dealing with what is concrete, specific, individual, unrepeatable, and constantly changing, but with a disembodied representation of the world, abstracted, central, not particularized in time and place, generally applicable, clear, and fixed. It is the world of legibility, the world of cliché, and the world of scale. It is the view from nowhere that is the longed-for world of AI. But it speaks to us. And why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't we dream that there is no limit to the ladder of abstraction that has its roots in the organization of electrical circuits? Why wouldn't we wish for any large dynamic system to be composable from scaled building blocks in the same way as the data pipes and caches of a CPU nestle on a die? Why wouldn't we want to hope that the actions and activities that make up the tasks and relationships and purposes to which we put our lives could not be expressed using an exact and finite vocabulary? We yearn for a team, for an organization, and for a world that is a logical closed system. And yet these are not logical closed systems. They are mostly people. Some of them will be programmers. Some of them will be designers. And all of them, in their way, will be skateboarders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Duncan. I think for all attendees, you can open your mic if you have a question. I have some question, but
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
yeah. So I have one question about as we have seen in your talk, the AI can destroy the entire ecosystem. So what is your advice for companies or teams to in the onboarding for juniors in order to foster collaboration? Because it's so easy to ask to your AI agent
Yes.
and avoid human issue instead of talk to your colleagues. So what is your advice to foster and the collaboration and for junior for the
Yes.
onboarding in the team?
Brilliant. That's such a good question. And I think that's the question that we all are going to sort of, we can choose to learn the answer to that question, or we can choose to pretend it's not being asked. I think when you look at things like Tailwind, if you look at what happened to TL Draw, what happened to Curl, there are lots of maintainers and so on who are getting completely inundated with this stuff. And I think they are being forced to find an answer to that. And in the case of Tailwind, it was we have to reduce the size of our team because our market has just been blown up by this here. So for those who wish to invest in those people and in those kind of like ecosystems, I think it's gone from being a passive choice to being an active choice. And I don't know how that is going to work commercially. Like it feels like looking back, we've been in this incredible world where like experience and money and ecosystems have all sort of been aligned, and now it's beginning to fall apart a bit. And all that XKCD about the tiny little strut that holds up the whole open source ecosystem, like that's not necessarily going to be a thing anymore. Like that was possible because that person had a well-paying job somewhere in a hobby, but it's not. That's an ecosystem function, not something that they're really being sort of paid for. So I don't know how we go forward from here, but we are definitely going to be in trouble if we don't have people who know how these things work.
But for to sharing the collective knowledge, do you recommend some sociable programming, for example, or some practices like that? Or
I mean, all the good software engineering practices are collaborative, aren't they? I mean, everything from code review to pair programming. I mean, the idea of the 10x developer is such a mad idea in a way, isn't it? Because what you want is a team. You want the theory building within the team, and you want that team to be the capable unit.
and to have the team spirit, yeah, right. We have several hands up. Maybe a Lewin. You need to open your mic.
Thank you, Llewellyn. Sorry, Duncan, I'm just curious. There's a lot of really good information in your talk, and I really loved the perspectives that you have on things. If there's one thing that I should take away from this talk, what would you want that to be? Like, what's the one thing that I could take away that would help me grow or change or learn from this talk?
That's quite a big question. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's sort of up to you. What's right for you? I think what I feel like needs to be said is I think the point about diversity is really, really important. And I think that this is a good opportunity to make that argument. And I think the tech industry is kind of going backwards in terms of diversity with the AI stuff. Like if you look at what happened to front-end development, where kind of like it suddenly became this incredible like fortress of gatekeeping upon gatekeeping. And there's I think a plausible narrative that was all about sort of shutting out the diversity and keeping the priesthood sort of there that was kind of existing in technology before. There are so many people like me in AI, frankly, that are having a great time and making lots of money. And it's not a particularly diverse field. So making that case is important. I think also we've got to find a way to speak up for these ecosystems and to solve those problems that are like killing projects like Tailwind or things like Curl or whatever. Like we live by that stuff as software developers. So we need to think about how to advocate for that and how to, I don't know, I feel like kind of like whatever the GitHub sponsors isn't going to cut it. Like how do we keep the ecosystem going?
Thank you. It's a really interesting answer.
I have a different take on the Tailwind situation that I wanted to run by.
Yeah.
So first of all, like as an open source developer myself, like I'm very envious of Tailwind's ability to monetize open source.
Yes.
Like I think that's amazing, right? Because so many open source projects are that little like solo developer just working and giving away stuff. It feels to me like what happened with Tailwind is that they found a way to monetize in the current market in the market shift.
Yeah.
And like right now, AI is making things shift faster than ever before,
Yeah.
but market shifting is far from a new thing.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess my view is not so much that Tailwind is failing because AI is reading their docs,
Yes.
but Tailwind is failing because selling documentation stopped being productive and they didn't shift how to monetize the product. And I say that as a person who does not know how to monetize my own open source like, project myself, right? But
Yeah.
but it still seems like that's the issue more than
Yeah.
like the reason the market shifted was because
Yeah.
of AI. But
Yes.
still, it seems like that's the actual issue.
There is something going on there, isn't there? I mean, it's kind of like there's probably a few things going on that's quite hard to unpick. I could sort of imagine that Tailwind was one of many projects that maybe could be subjects to that. Like,
Yeah.
I,
Well, I imagine, yeah, I mean, again, I imagine across the board, because you also were talking about like designers.
yeah,
And again, like the way that designers monetize is probably going to change too, because
yeah,
now creating stuff, especially creating sketches and like prototyping ideas,
yes.
that whole thing has shifted.
Right. And like I think but there's kind of a what seems to be probably the most plausible outcome of this, which is that everything just does get a bit more generic and people just do use AI to make their art assets and their designs. And we've moved from like, it's like going from medieval calligraphy or whatever to the printed book. And actually like it's great. More people can read the printed book, more people can use their computer more powerfully. And
But
if
also, like a
yeah,
lot
go on.
more authors are printing with the printed book. And
Yes.
so, like,
Yeah.
like in a weird way, I feel like on a personal level, my creativity has gone up with AI
Yes.
because there's so many ideas that used to die on the vine that aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And I think there's something so exciting about that. And I really don't want to be sort of like speaking against that because I think that is really exciting. And there's a sense in which this is just kind of a lament for this thing that I didn't even know we had, which was this
Mm.
almost artisanal kind of like world that I think I sort of assumed had gone out with a with a spinning wheel or something. And like in fact we were living in this incredibly rich and like rewarding place that we kind of mistook for a technology like a bunch of people writing code or whatever. Um,
Yeah. And didn't realize it was artisanal at the time.
no,
Like
no,
until it's gone. Like that was just writing until the printing press came along.
yeah,
It
right, yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
even
yeah,
thought of as calligraphy. It's just that's how you write.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think the thing, but the thing that gives me pause about AI compared to the printing press is that like the territory that it covers is so much more like it gets much more inside us than like any of those other technologies do. Like whatever, like
Yeah.
a database is incredibly transformative technology, but like databases aren't ultimately gonna change the way that you think, or they change the way you think about problems, but they're so clearly a tool out in the world and not something which is kind of inside you. And I don't know how to draw that distinction. I'm not a philosopher, but there is something changing there that I'm really interested in. Like I want us to understand that. Um, I guess I also have a vested interest in that. My work is like making state functions in technology, and there is like a real quality question there which we have to contend with. Like it used to be just like rubbish vendors would like cause like scandals in the papers because all the software is broken and people
Yeah.
got put in prison and bad things happened. But now we have this new source of mediocrity which is a liability in my world, uh, which is which I'm sort of trying to come to grips with, I think.
Oh, thank you.
That's right. I mean, this is also interesting. Um, I'm I'm sort of I really want like it makes me very happy to see people empowered by the tools, and then it makes me anxious to think two or three steps down where maybe there's a different kind of disempowerment comes as the price of that.
Yeah, I shared an article on Tailwind that is based on open source, and he need to shift his business model because of AI. He is a victim of AI, yeah, in his business model.
Yeah. No one can say no, can they?
Another question? No? So thank you so much, Duncan.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Jacqueline, for putting us in touch.
Yeah, thank you, Jack.
Thank you. Yeah, Duncan, thank you for your talk. It was really good to see. Really informative. I appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thank you. All right. Cheerio.
Chair, thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye.
Thank you.
See you soon.